you both do to kind of get some flavor, and then you're not even clued into what we're going to talk about today, so.
I'll improvise.
Okay, good.
I show what Brazilians are made of, right?
That's for the whole purpose.
The true startup entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
So Sergio, tell us just a little bit about what you're doing.
Sure. Brasscom is the Brazilian Association of Information Technology and Communication Companies. We have about 50 associates, but we have the large players in the market. So it's about 70% of the IT GDP from Brazil, is in our membership. So it includes companies like IBM, HP, Accenture, Microsoft, Intel, Oracle, Google, as well as Brazilian companies such as Stefanini, BRQ, CINT, that have a strong presence in the Brazilian market and are starting to internationalize as well. And I'm the director of global market development for Brasscom.
So what's the objective of Brasscom then? What are some of your members'
The vision for Brasscom is really to position Brazil as one of the top 5 global IT centers. A lot of people don't know, but Brazil is the 7th largest global ICT market and the 8th largest IT market. So a lot of that power is really from the internal markets. The exports component of that still small, 2.4 billion last year compared to 60 plus billion from India and 10 billion from China as an example. So we want to position, to continue to promote the market, the sector in Brazil, to expand exports of Brazilian companies, but also to start to help internationalize the Brazilian companies and to foster more innovation in the internal markets and externally as well.
Definitely. Brazil's a very hot market right now.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about what you're doing, Joni.
So my name is Joni Girardi. I'm from Brazil. I came in the US in 1995 to run a subsidiary of a Brazilian company. I started the company here. And since then, I have ran 5 different high-tech startups since I've been here in 15 years. So the first one was a Brazilian company. The second one was right in the bubble time. I was the 56th employee. In 6 months, the company got to 56. In 6 months, the company folded. So I was like,
wow.
The third startup was also a Brazilian company that was also funded and also folded because lack of funding. The fourth company I spun off, so it was my own company started, and that company is doing well. And now I have funded a new company, another high-tech startup. So I'm an electrical engineer, so I've done programming my life at the beginning, but for the past 15 years I've been pretty much in the business side. And knowing the Brazilian market, the Brazilian culture in the US, and kind of bringing what we have there over here has been quite interesting. So hopefully I'll have some interesting thoughts to add here.
So talk a little bit about the contrasts and the comparisons between U.S. culture and Brazilian culture, from the way we do business here versus in Brazil. Talk a little bit. Let's talk about being an entrepreneur here as well, and what that cultural advantage or disadvantage brings to the table for you.
It's quite interesting. Usually when people ask things like that, I like to say that if you're an entrepreneur, like in the US or in Brazil, and you start a business, it's tough. Usually starting a new business is difficult because it's something they're trying to create a new product, a new service, you have to sell it, and find people that buy it. If it's hard in your own country, where you know the language, you know all the rules, put yourself in a different place where you don't know the language very well, you don't know the culture, so it's harder. There are many differences. Brazil is a lot about connections. Most of the business you do is because you know somebody that can connect to the right person. So the personal connection in Brazil is almost like critical, especially at the beginning of the business. In the US, yes, we are people. We have personal connections, but people are more logical, more objective here. As long as you have a good product, good service, people hear you and probably can buy from you, even though they don't know you. In my current business that I have for 5 years now, we have over 100 customers. They're all mid-sized companies from no revenues to $500 million revenues per year. And about 90% of them, we never saw them. We did all the business by phone, internet, and sales are from 10, 50 grand. We do a lot of services, and we don't know them.
So would that ever happen in Brazil? Would you ever get to this point with 100 customers in Brazil without meeting? a
Well, when I
majority
left
of them?
Brazil, internet was pretty incipient, so that
Okay.
back then would not happen. Nowadays, I don't know how it's going. I know that in Brazil, the personal touch, the face-to-face is a lot more important than here. So I think it would be much harder in Brazil to have the same model that here works so well.
So what is it about the personal touch in Brazil versus the way U.S. buyers, for example, in a corporation would buy here? So why is that the way it is in Brazil versus,
Because I think maybe there's also something about the Latin origin. You know, Latin people are more like, social. They usually like to interact before they do business. I don't know, anybody from Brazil would,
If I may add, I think part of it is related to how we deal with uncertainty, and when we meet someone, we talk with them, it seems that we know more about what's going on. And here, because of the way the society works and the law works, people feel more secure. That is, for example, if you get some payment, you don't provide the service, I can sue you,
that's a good point.
right?
so there's
Yeah.
recourse if something
Yeah,
doesn't
so
work out?
it's
Okay.
not only about I
Yeah.
want to see you because I want to see if I like you, but it's about managing risk.
Trust.
Yeah.
Here, most of the time, this is a very good point. Most of the time when you buy something, if you don't get what you expect, usually you can get your money back. Usually you can. Sometimes you can, but usually you can. In Brazil, that's complicated.
A good example of that is that a contract that is closed over the phone in this country is a binding contract.
Yes.
You can withhold it in court.
Yes.
No such thing in Brazil.
Right.
Yep.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Sergio, what perspectives do you
I
have
think
on
in
this?
addition to those points, from a cultural perspective, Brazil is really a melting pot of different cultures and cultural diversity. And so I think that component is also important. And the creative DNA of Brazilians in general also is an important factor that supports innovation in some ways, an innovative approach to problems, to creation of ideas and such. And like many people don't know as well, but Brazil, if you look at advertising space, like you have the Lions, Cannes Lions Festival, Brazil is the third largest winner of Lions, just behind the US and the UK. In terms of, it is considered a very creative country. So I think that component is also part of the culture, part of the creative DNA that's embedded in Brazilians that supports the factor of the innovation as well.
So if Brazil itself is such a hot market, why would a Brazilian entrepreneur be motivated to come to the U.S.?
Well, I've been here for 15 years, so
I
I
know
left
you
Brazil
have.
before it got really hot.
But you have a network down there as well.
Yes.
And you're in contact with entrepreneurs there. You certainly are in contact with entrepreneurs there. What would drive them to move to expanding into the U.S. market if the market in Brazil is so big and so high?
I think if I may put my perspective,
Please do.
it's the ecosystem that I think the innovation requires really, problems and ideas and an ecosystem to drive that innovation. And it's that component of the ecosystem, it's a lot harder in Brazil than it's in here. So it's much more difficult. The cost of capital is higher. It's harder to get funding as well. So that component of the ecosystem, it's I think much more involved here than in Brazil.
So you're saying the ecosystem in Brazil is probably weaker, not as strong as the supporting resources that you might see here in Silicon Valley?
Traditionally, yes. I think we are seeing also because of the such a hot market, we're seeing an evolution, not only from the perspective of the government that is changing a mindset. I think if the government, Dilma and Minister Aloysio Mercadante from Science and Technology, for the first time really I see that they understand that information communication technology is critical to the economic and social development. And innovation is very critical now. In fact, he changed, Aloysio Mercadante, the Minister of Science and Technology in Brazil, changed the name of the ministry to Science, Technology and Innovation. Right? So there are elements that they're changing. He created the Science Without Borders program, which will create 100,000 scholarships, so Brazilian students can come to undergrad, graduate school, PhD schools. So there's still, that component is changing, but still the ecosystem for private equity and venture capital is evolving in Brazil. It's getting better. It's not to the level it's here, but I think that's still part of the challenge for entrepreneurs.
So you see the innovation strong there, but you don't see the supporting resources and ecosystem for building a business as strong as it is here.
Not as strong as in here, but it's evolving, but it's not as strong as in here.
And what's your take on that, John?
A couple of thoughts. One of it is from when it came to the U.S., that company was already successful in Brazil selling to the industrial automation market hardware, and then they want to expand internationally, and they're trying to see, how can we do it. So one idea was to open a subsidiary in the U.S. and see what happens. And the interesting thing was, one of the initial goals was trying to crack the market, the U.S. market, because it's the largest. It's the most opportunity, more money, a lot of companies, and so forth. However, the solution the company was selling was really mission critical. I mean, if you don't trust the vendor, you're not going to buy it if you're a company, right? So we had this kind of, flaw in our vision that we thought that we would be able to crack a market with a company that nobody knew before. So that was the flaw of the vision. However, by having a subsidiary in the U.S., we started selling a lot to South America, all the countries all over South America and in Central America, because in those countries, they see Brazil as a big country with a lot of technology. And now there's this company from Brazil that has a subsidiary in the U.S., so they thought we were much bigger and stronger than we really were.
Okay.
And that helped us make our message more like, we're strong. We are strong, but, from a perception standpoint, until we get a subsidiary in the U.S., we were just like a Brazilian company. Now we became a multinational, even though the office in the U.S. was smaller. So that was one side, giving a multinational perspective, you reach more markets, maybe not the U.S. alone, but other places. That's one standpoint. The other is, as he was saying, when we look at from Brazil, is a developing country. When we look at Europe, U.S. or Japan, they are developed countries, and we see their models much more advanced than ours in many different perspectives. So we want to take a piece of it. We want to learn it. We want to see how it works. And sometimes some of those perceptions are good, and sometimes are like, for instance, I've seen many companies coming to the Silicon Valley thinking that the money here is easy to find. Yes, this is the place with the biggest amount of venture capital. Yes, but try to get it. I mean, it's not easy. So they come here, I'm going to get money. Well, there is money here, but it's going to be hard. So, but there's a lot of things trying to learn how the Americans do. There's a lot of great stuff here in Brazil is still lacking. The technology, the infrastructure, the venture capital. So I think Brazil is coming here to get a taste of it.
And what about large U.S. companies that want to go into Brazil and tap the market? What have you seen going the other way,
Certainly.
inbound into Brazil?
There's a big flow now from companies that are interested in the growth of the Brazilian market. Just recently, as an example, the ICT market grew 44% since 2008, between 2008 and 2010.
That's significant growth.
It's a big growth. In areas like oil and gas, as an example, IBM, GE, EMC, FMC Technologies, those companies are all creating research and development centers in Rio, in one tech park in Rio, with Petrobras to really explore that opportunity. Was the pre-salt significant technology is going to be required to be able to extract that oil in a cost-effective way. So we've seen a lot of flows, oil and gas, definitely one example, but multinationals development have been in Brazil for a long time, for decades. And in fact, I learned that IBM started in Brazil in 1917, which was the first market that they went after. I was surprised when I heard the date. But definitely, they are investing more. They see the opportunity with the market, and I think that's going to help also foster more innovation in particular areas.
So from a foreign direct investment perspective, there's probably not a lot of need to create incentives to get U.S. companies to invest in the Brazilian marketplace.
Not right now. That, in fact, is one of the biggest challenges, because it's making the Rio so valued. So because there's so much FDI going to Brazil, the currency is really super valued right now, which makes it tough also to compete in exports and such. But that's something that the central bank has to deal with. But definitely lots of foreign direct investments, which also I think is going to facilitate capital availability for innovation.
And what about other sectors besides oil and gas? What are you seeing in
Definitely in the agribusiness space,
Yes.
there's a
Food
lot of
production,
investments.
sure.
Financial services traditionally has been a high technology investment sector, and there's investments going there as well. But I think those are the primary ones that we see.
anything in common?
Just one, because I know the large corporation is not my area of expertise, but what I've seen a lot is when large companies try to establish in Brazil some kind of business, usually you either go to some kind of joint venture, some kind of partnership with local companies, and that approach usually is highly political. Sometimes there is even government involved. But if you can get it, usually it can be really profitable because it's really large investments, large opportunities. People that try to go directly is a lot more challenging, especially because I think it's easier for a Brazilian to get used to the culture here than the opposite from a business standpoint. In Brazil, there's a lot more, bureaucracy, which is really hard to deal with, frustrating. Besides all this kind of, personal connection that, sometimes here you do business quickly, there you have to go through a lot of, talk. So by hearing some people, often I hear kind of, frustration about trying to go to Brazil and getting lost and not knowing where to talk, or feeling like now you have to bribe somebody to do something, which is not really true if you know where to go.
So how long does it take to set up a business in Brazil? And Robert, that's a question for you too. So if you're going to go to Rio, set up your company, how long is this whole process going to take as far as your licensing, your corporation? Any ideas?
Typically, you're talking about between 60 to 90 days. And you may think that's not too much, but when you compare it that you can get online here on Zoom.com, and in 48 hours you're up and running, it's quite a big difference. But what really takes a toll is that you have to go through a lot of different hoops and holes and to try to get all the proper paperwork done. And typically, you'll find that you are going to be at least 120 to 180 days before you have all your licensing taken care of. And to close a business, it's about 5 years. Yeah.
That's definitely one of the biggest challenges that we have is to
It sounds like
streamline that process.
Yeah.
For small companies, which I have quite an experience here, it's amazing because here you can actually focus on your core business. You can pretty much outsource everything else, payroll, accounting, whatever. So you just do what you know, which is great. In Brazil, when I left, you couldn't do things like that. I'm not sure if nowadays it's kind of easier, but I remember Brazil. I had a little business in Brazil, and you're the entrepreneur that was supposed to be pushing your core idea. You have to be spinning wheels all over the place to keep all of these balls, in the air. So it's a waste of energy in a way.
But the good news, right, is that that's also changing. The mindset of the government is changing. It's very hard to make changes happen. But just recently was the bigger Brazil plan, Plano Brasil Maior, that was unveiled by Dilma. Big challenge is the taxation, the complexity and the amount of taxation. And Plano Brasil Maior for the software and IT services sector reduces taxation because there was traditionally a 20% taxation on Social Security on payroll, that goes to 0. That basis of taxation now goes to profit, 2.5%, but also if it's exports of software services, that goes to 0. So there's a recognition by the government that change is required, and although no one really believed that change was going to happen, this reduction in taxation the way it did, it happened. So I think there are positive signs. Again, very challenging, very complex to introduce all those changes, but the government understands and it's acting at least in some way on them.
So if there's an evolving business infrastructure and it is improving, where today is the innovation coming from? Where is innovation coming from in Brazil? in the companies and the technologies and the service delivery models and the pricing structure, the business models, where will you see that innovation if you've got sort of constraints of the business environment? Because it's one thing we have in here at Silicon Valley, we're great at growing companies here. And there's a lot of creative thinking that comes out of that and a lot of innovation that comes out of that.
I
So
can
how
give
does
you
that
a few
happen in
examples,
Brazil?
like from some of our members, right? CIT is an example of a company that, is tied to the university. In fact, that we came in the Unicamp. So there are tech parks. There are 18 tech parks in Brazil that are heavily connected to universities.
Okay.
And also they are, connected in some way, shape or form to incubation of companies. So I think there is a process there to help. There are companies that are coming out of that. And others, like Cesar, is like in the northeast of Brazil, there's Porto Digital. It's also an area where we've seen innovation. And it's driven by, in this case, the example that I'm thinking is like with the agribusiness. They are looking at ways to innovate the processes for like controlling irrigation, for example. That's a big waste of water, right? So they created a solution that connects, uses GPS, uses mobility, uses real-time communication to help control that process more effectively. So again, there are lots of problems to be solved. And these companies that are usually connected to tech parks are working in ways to solve that.
If I may, Google bought a company in Minas Gerais that was a search company. And I would say a lot of the innovation is kind of similar to what happens here in the Silicon Valley, where you have Berkeley and Stanford with a lot of ideas working with companies. That's what we're doing in Brazil.
Right.
So you have the same thing happen in Belo Horizonte, where this company was bought by Google, and Google has a lab in Brazil doing a lot of things there. In Unicamp, the same thing is happening. You see companies coming up.
And also large companies, SAP, they have a lab in the south of Brazil that works into product development as well, because there are so many complexities in the taxation, the accounting and such, that led SAP to establish a center of excellence that they use. The BT Buckets is another example. It's a company that created a behavioral targeting tool that, in fact, they were invited by Google to present in one of their user groups here last year. So
It's
they're
called BT.
Buckets. So they like do segmentation based on behavior. It's a cloud computing solution, and it's heavily used. In fact, they just announced that they passed like a billion users that have been segmented by that tool. So there are some examples of companies that are coming up with some innovative ideas.
Any comments, John?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. From an evolution standpoint, like the entrepreneur spirit in Brazil. When I was little, I remember that the perfect job was working for the government. Like my parents and my uncles, so they want to work for the government. Big companies, you put your jacket on your coat and you just drink coffee and you get your salary.
Security.
That was Brazil. 30 years ago. That was the model of, that's my job. Kind of. Not too bad, but kind of. When I got out of college, was who I'm going to work for. Looking for employment. That was 10 years ago, a little bit more. So last time I went to Brazil, I'm from a small city in the south of Brazil, where I was born and raised until I was 17, and then I moved to the capital. And then last time I went to Brazil, when I visited, the capital of Porto Alegre, and also this small town, I was so surprised talking with a bunch of of my peers and like my nephews and nieces, like the young generation, 20s. People talking about, I want to open a new business. The idea now in the population, there's a lot of people trying to open a new business. The city that I left 20 plus years ago was major agriculture, like a far, 300 miles from the capital, was really agriculture, that's it. Today that city has 5 companies with more than 200 million revenues per year in manufacturing. Something that, back 20 years ago was like, an industry in the city, forget it, And people talk with, I'm going to open this, I'm going to do that. So I think besides, this whole, there's money in the country, there's education in Brazil is really good. when I took my electrical engineering in Brazil, and I came to the U.S. to do an MBA, I was expecting, wow, MBA in the U.S. is going to be hard. Well, yeah, it was hard. But, my course in Brazil was really hard. So I thought, hey, it seems like in Brazil, the education is in good footing. You just have to evolve people to be more open-minded. So there's a shift, I think, besides of all this dynamic, I think in the perspective of people being more entrepreneurs and of creating things, trying to add new value, not only looking for a job, and that helps a lot creating all this hot economy.
So now it's a little more cool to be an entrepreneur in Brazil. Would you guys agree?
Brazil now is a good moment in the economy. Now they talk about my area. I think it's the tax in employment in my area is 0. It's impossible my company grow there. I don't know where's the jobs in this area. In the United States, I don't know. It's the same in Brazil, I think no. Because the tax, the employment tax in the United States, I think to start a new job here, I consider hire employees, more facility here, and knowledge. In Brazil now is a big problem for us.
If I may comment, we had 20 years of military rule in Brazil, and that had a big impact on how people behave and how they look at risk, like starting a business, just like he said. But now that we have a stable country, the nature of the Brazilians, the energy and the ability to try new things are coming up.
And Brazilians are early adopters. If you look at the numbers for internet usage, Twitter.
It's amazing. It's clear that something different. Yeah. So I see a lot of startups. I mean, we're looking at this happening now, but I truly believe that like 5 years from now, we will see many more companies coming from Brazil.
So all this is very positive, but the negative is that English language capabilities in Brazil in business are very low.
It's a big challenge.
They're the lowest in all of Latin America. So there's
Lowest?
Lowest
That's a
in-
stretch.
lowest in Latin
But I
America.
think you have to consider one point there.
Ecuador, Bolivia?
No,
No
there's-
way. Bolivia? No way, I'm sorry. I have
Bolivia's
to.
not listed here. Peru is.
Bolivia is Latin America.
But you have to consider the scale as well, because if you look at scale, Brazil has the largest
Absolutely.
population. And you have to consider the context, right? If you get Campinas, the place where we went to school, the GDP is about the size of Chile's GDP. So you have to put that in perspective as well. Definitely, it's a big challenge though.
It is.
Because it is a factor that impacts certainly the IT services industry, because there could be much more opportunities in that space. What are we doing? Like Brasscom has one of the pillars is human resources and education. So we are working with the Minister of Education to really align the curriculum, the long-term curriculum with the market needs. That's one part. Short-term, we're working also to, special projects to develop capabilities. Like in the case of software engineering, there's ProSoft. In the case of English, that's EnglishSoft. So there are some specific, funding available for companies to really continue to drive the capabilities in their human capital pool. And companies are doing that. Again, CIT is another example that they have, in fact, we were visiting, huge focus on preparing their employees with English capabilities and such.
So that the companies are doing
The
that.
companies are augmenting what
Yep.
we have in the school systems as well. But certainly it's a big challenge and needs to continue to be addressed. But again, the scale, the labor pool is larger than any other country in Latin America.
So when you were going to school, how does your education compare to what you see with your nieces and nephews as far as their English language capabilities now?
I think, from a language standpoint, let me bring one thing that I learned about 7, 8 years ago. A company was trying to outsource to one of the BRIC countries some of their support services, and they wanted a team that would be a certain cost, good English skills, and time zone that could serve the U.S. and Europe would be the target. So they went, they checked Brazil, China, India, and Russia. I think it was all in the BRIC countries. And at the end of the day, pretty much, everybody was kind of the same level. If you get good people from Brazil, from China, whatever, they have, good English. The cost is a little bit different, And at the end of the day, the company decided Brazil just because of the time zone. Everything else was about the same, but because Brazil is the time zone that is good for the U.S. and, fairly okay for Europe, time zone decided. So, talk about my nephews and nieces, they are still in the countryside. They don't need really English.
Okay.
So comparing to me, I had a undergrad in electrical engineering, which usually have a lot of books in English, so you have to learn English. So I would say people that are doing probably science degrees today, engineering, things like that, I think those English are better than what mine was, because today in Brazil, for instance, you can have TV in English. When I was in Brazil 15 years ago, only Portuguese. There's a lot more opportunities. There's a lot of people going out of Brazil and coming back to Brazil. Back 15 years ago, it was rare to see people, traveling abroad. So people that are in the more international related business, their English is definitely better than what I had when I moved to the U.S., my English was better than my peers, and I thought in 1 month my English would be perfect. It's been 15 years and I'm still struggling. It takes time.
Well, if I may, part of it is also related to how often do you use the language. Because we know that many people in Brazil, they spend years trying to learn English, but they never had the opportunity or the incentives to really use it, right? And I guess it's changing.
Because I think to reading and writing capabilities are a lot stronger. In fact, there are some, the TOEFL, test of English as a foreign language. Brazilians score very well, compared to some other countries. So it depends really. I think the speaking capability is always the challenge.
So is there a big push with your outsourcers like Stefanini to learn English, assuming that a large percentage of their business is probably coming from
Definitely.
US?
If you look at the companies that are internationalizing, such as Stefanini, CPM Praxis, DRQ, CIT, there's significant push to English, improving the English capabilities across the country.
So you've seen changes in their hiring process, you've seen
Yeah,
more
they are.
support from the companies to raise the level of English?
Especially the ones that are looking for internationalization, they're changing their HR practices, their training and such to include a more aggressive global perspective.
I would.
Do you have any comments? You've been here for a few days and getting back into speaking English again. What's your experience?
I agree. In one point, in Brazil, don't practice every day.
Practice it, okay.
Only to read it, but read a specific, in my case, in specific case in informatical literature. But I think web is a great place to learn English, because when I have one search in Google, you learn, you can you try to put in one subject in web and find, especially in American literatures, and you practice it, but not every day. It's a problem. I come back. I go back to Brazil next week. But 10 days 10 days here, for me it's good to practice. Brazilians learning another language, it's more easy. Because Portuguese for Americans, I think it's better to learn.
It's hard, yeah.
Yeah.
Portuguese is hard.
I know when one English is in Brazil 6 or 7 years. Speak, I think 5% after 7 years. It's not good for against people.
There's another thought about the English, why I think today is so much more pervasive in Brazil. If I go back again, 15 plus years ago, finding people in Brazil that would be traveling abroad, only the very wealthy people. Traveling abroad would be really expensive. I mean, like in my family, zero. Nobody ever traveled abroad. I was the first one. Now, fast forward 15 years, most people, I mean, a lot of people travel abroad. So I think, Brazil was a closed country, not only because import-export was limited, but was closed from all standpoints, including traveling. Now, when we opened the frontiers, people started to go out, prices went down to travel, more schools, so it's much better. It's improving for sure.
This is the silver lining of this stronger Rio.
Absolutely.
The ability for, in fact, that's also helping, the stronger Rio is helping companies in acquisition, like Stefanini acquired Tech Team, acquired CXI, so that's also creating an opportunity, even though it's a challenge for exports, creates an opportunity for companies to internationalize through acquisition.
So what advice would you give to Brazilian entrepreneurs who want to penetrate the U.S. market? You've been here and you understand, you've been to the most highly competitive, complicated market in the United States if you're in the tech space. What would be sort of your top 2 or 3 pointers or tips that
Talk
you would
with
share?
me.
Look, there's a tear.
Open-minded, and I think, there's a lot of Brazilian entrepreneurs here. I think they can be a great resource for helping understand some of the challenges. I'm not selling services, I'm not doing consulting service, but overall, there's if you go even to the San Francisco consulate, Brazilian consulate, they have also connection with a lot of Brazilians. I think, meeting with Brazilian entrepreneurs, it's a way to get some cheat sheet, to save you some time. Also because sometimes Brazilian come very kind of suspicious of things, things are going to work, they're going to try to get my money. And if you tell them, some basic rules, how things work here, you don't have to be so paranoid about trusting, you can trust people. You can start, moving forward instead of being always like, no. So I think talking with people would be one of the best ways for people to expedite their...
And Robert, how big is the Brazilian diaspora here? Do you have any idea?
Well, I think what Joni is saying is right. You want to emulate what people have already learned, what to do and what not to do, especially. But first and foremost, people have to be committed and to come out here and get their feet wet and learn the ropes. There's no easy way about it, like there anywhere else. They're probably so accustomed of navigating in their own environment that they get kind of in the comfort zone. Well, they have to leave that comfort zone and understand that here is a different business mindset. And I think of all the challenges that Brazilian entrepreneurs face coming to this country is pretty much the business mindset, the mental mind in which they come here and try to be successful. Brazil's a different environment, and they come out they have the experience locally where things happen, their own dynamics, like Joni was mentioning, they're very intensive in relationships. And here it's different. Here you have to really prove yourself from your value proposition. If you're able to actually prove that you have something that's worthwhile and you can engage and you can address a specific need or resolve a specific problem, next question was, well, listen, where can I take you for a ride? Give me 3 examples of 3 clients I can call up on and see if the same problem that I have is the one that they were able to resolve through your solution or whatever. So I think that first and foremost, Brazilian entrepreneurs need to, when they wake up every day, not just read the Globo or the Folha or the Gazeta Mercantil, but they got to read Wall Street Journal, they got to read Le Figaro, they got to read the Financial Times. Understand that we live in a global world. And I think that's our biggest challenge, understand what it means to be a global entrepreneur.
If I may, it's not for everybody, but a good idea is to move to US. If you have a small company, people have partners, just send a partner, move to US and,
For how long?
well, for at least 5 years, you know. What I've seen, and I'm not saying everybody, but you see companies in Brazil with potential, and they look and they think that the US market is kind of easy, you know, I have a great product, great service. You know, you really to be committed, as Robert said, and I would add as a follow-up is to move and be here and be responsible for the penetration here in the US. I'm not saying that's for everybody, but definitely I think we should see that more often.
And I think I agree. Just the time frame, I think it varies really, but I think it's important that you participate in
You make a commitment.
make a commitment, learn and adapt also. Make sure that you're adapting to this environment and look at the things that are advantage, you know, from your Brazilian background, but make sure that you adapt also to the business environment, because that is an important factor. A lot of people really have a hard time making that transition, and it's important that you do that very quickly.
And at the end of the day, you don't want to be a Brazilian company. You just want to be a successful company that has a lot of clients. Like Joni mentioned here, over 100 clients, doesn't know probably one of them. And the only reason he's in business with those companies is because he's successful in addressing their needs and resolving their issues. So at the end of the day, it's not being Brazilian, South African, or Chinese, or Indian. It's being able to address the market properly and be successful. And to Ricardo's point, yes, we often say when companies going into Brazil, they got to show commitment. And to show commitment, the first thing you got to do is you got to establish your footprint on the ground, permanently. And it's a two-way street, same thing here. You got to definitely make the commitment, and the first thing you do to do that is establish yourself here. Now, there are different ways you can do that too. You can be here, and you can be also in a partnership mode and outsource mode. There's several different business models in which you can achieve that. But the bottom line is you got to commit the resources. Yes, this is where I'm going to go. This is where I want to be, and I will commit the resources to do so.
Let me give an example of the first company that came to the U.S. It's a very interesting story. So the company started to do PRs about, you know, we're going to open a subsidiary in the U.S., we're going to talk, we're going to do it. And I was like, I want to go, right? So I talked to my boss, which was, his boss was one of the company owners. You know, I would like to be part of this, you know. So, okay, I'll check it out. So, you know, 6 months ago, I passed by and nobody talked to me. So I said, okay, no, somebody else probably got the opportunity. So one day, you know, comes the boss and called me, you know, hey, I want to talk with you. I was like, no, really? I mean, I usually never talk with the big boss. So I went over there, and make a long story short, at the end of the conversation, he said, okay, so I want you to be in the U.S. And I was like, no, wow. I was like, no, so excited. So I was thinking, okay, I'll have to start learning, you know, some little bit accounting and learning English and start planning. Probably it's going to take me, I don't know, a year, 6 months. So when am I going to go? What about in a month? Really? I mean, what about preparation? There's no preparation for this. You got to go there, put this on the ground and start learning. I mean, how can you learn the U.S. from here? And it's an approach. I mean, some people like to do a lot of more planning, which, you know, can also work. But sometimes, you know, I also believe that the best way to learn a culture, how to do things, is be in the middle of it and hitting the ground and talk with people, facing things. And the other thing also in the U.S., which, you know, a lot of people get frustrated from Brazil, maybe any country, is the U.S. is the country of the attorneys and the consultants. And people think that, you know, you hire a consultant, you're good. Well, one of the good things that Americans do is sell. I mean, they usually sell very well what they do. But sometimes, you know, what they do is not exactly what you need. And it's hard to know if they're going to work or not efficiently, because you have a business, you have a culture, and you go to a different country that is totally different. So I usually tell people, you know, being here is important because you start to understand the rules here. And when you try to hire somebody, be cautious, not because you're suspicious of the person, but finding a good fit nowadays. I mean, you can be an expert in my area of expertise, and you may not be a good fit in my business because of cultural differences, or maybe your expertise in a certain type of industry that you want to tackle something else. So, you know, finding the right people to help you, especially in your core business, is no easy task. You have to really do your diligent work.
And there's two kinds of salespeople. there are salespeople that want you to buy what I'm selling, or there are salespeople that want to sell what you need.
Exactly.
Yep.
Good
So
point.
there's,
Certainly.
Yep.
yeah. Comments and questions, any other topics you guys want to bring up or discuss?